Well, I'm glad that you are back with us again for groups here at 707, where we are diving into scripture together, looking at passages and then talking about them in your groups. Tonight, we're going to continue our study, our look at the life and work of Jesus. We're going to flip over to the Gospel of Luke, and we're going to be in chapter 14, the Gospel of Luke, chapter 14, and we're going to start in verse 1 if you want to read along. So Luke 14, verse 1, it says, "One Sabbath, when Jesus went to dine at the house of a ruler of the Pharisees, they were watching him carefully." Now in this very first verse, we see that Jesus has been invited to celebrate what is called the Sabbath with a religious leader, with a Pharisee. And it says that they invited him over and that they were watching him carefully. Now, this Sabbath was something that was established way back in creation. If you go back to the book of Genesis and you read the creation account, you'll see that God created the heavens and the earth, everything that's in them, humanity, animals, plants, everything. He created it all in 6 days. And then on the seventh day, Scripture says that he rested. And so because God rested on the seventh day, this thing called Sabbath, which is simply just means it's a day of rest. It's a day that you're not supposed to work. And so this tradition of Sabbath was established way back in creation. Then it was created as a law by Moses whenever Moses comes into the picture several years later. And so we see this tradition of a Sabbath, which was seen as a good thing. It's good for you and I to take breaks. If you don't have a day where you just rest and relax, where you're not working, then you need one. You need to find time that you can rest. God established rest as something that was holy, as something that we all needed, as a regular part of our rhythm of work. However, during Jesus' time, when Jesus walked the earth, these religious rulers had taken something that was meant to be good and they had turned it into a burden, where they had this long list of things that you weren't allowed to do on the Sabbath. And if you ever did one, it was like breaking the law. It was seen as a terrible thing to do. It was seen as a sin, as something that you did against God. And so this thing that was designed by God to be good, they turned into a curse. And so you see this time, this day on a Sabbath where Jesus is invited over. He's invited over to share a meal with these Pharisees. And then in verse 2, as we continue reading, it says, "And behold, there was a man before him who had dropsy. And Jesus responded to the lawyers and Pharisees, saying, 'Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?'" And so you see what has happened is these religious leaders have set up a trap. They've invited Jesus over for dinner on the Sabbath, not because they wanted to spend time with him, but because they're trying to find a way to convince the rest of the people of Israel that Jesus is a bad guy. And so they've invited him over for dinner on the Sabbath, and then they've brought this guy who has dropsy. Now, dropsy is a strange disease from back in the day. Forms of it are still around today, but basically it just means that he was experiencing swelling because he was having all kinds of extra liquids in different parts of his body. And so basically he would have just looked like the girl from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory whenever she chews the gum and she blows up like a giant blueberry. That's what he would have looked like. He probably wasn't blue, but he would have been like super inflated and it would have looked strange. And so you could visibly tell that there's something wrong. And so these Pharisees brought before Jesus this man who is in need of healing. And they brought it before Jesus on a day of Sabbath. And so Jesus looks at these religious leaders because he knows it's a trap. He knows that they're trying to trick him. And so he asks them this question: "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" And what the Pharisees and the religious leaders are thinking, but they're not going to say, is they're thinking, no, you're not supposed to do any kind of work on the Sabbath. You're supposed to just rest. But then Jesus responds. Verse 4, it says, "But they remained silent. Then Jesus took the man with dropsy and he healed him and sent him away." Verse 5, Jesus responds to the Pharisees. He says, "Which of you, having a son or an ox that has fallen into a well on a Sabbath day, will not immediately pull him out. And so Jesus, knowing that they're trying to trap him, they're trying to trick him, he asks them the question, is it lawful to heal or not on the Sabbath? They don't respond. And so Jesus heals the man on the Sabbath, thus breaking the rule that the Pharisees have set up, thus falling into the trap. But then Jesus responds to the Pharisees with this amazing second question. He says, which of you, if you had a son or an ox who is in trouble, who fell into a well on the Sabbath day, would not immediately help him out? You see, Jesus is pointing out the Pharisees' hypocrisy. He's saying, you want to expect everyone else to do something one way whenever you would do it a different way yourself. He says, if you had seen this man with dropsy, this man with the disease who is in need of help, if you saw him as one of your own children or as your own property with value, you would have done whatever it takes to take care of this person, regardless of whether it was the Sabbath day or not. And you see, this not only points out the hypocrisy of the religious leaders, points out how they want to obey the law, but through obeying the law that they're putting people in shackles and chains, and they're leaving people who are in need to just fend for themselves once a day, once a week. He points this out, but he also makes it known for himself. He says it doesn't matter what the time or the day, it doesn't matter what the laws, it doesn't matter what the social norm is. If there's someone in need, I am there to help. And so for you and I today, this is a promise that no matter what time, no matter where we're at, our God is for us. He's not against us. He's seeking you out, seeking to bring healing when we are in need. And the promise is this, that if you and I desire to be like Christ, then it means that sometimes we have to buck social norms. We have to say, we're not going to just do what everyone else is doing because everyone else is doing it. But we're going to trust in what God has called us and asked us to do, and we're going to provide for those in need. You see, because other people say so or because other people do so is a terrible reason to make a life choice. And so sometimes that means that seeking God, that living like Christ in this world means that we have to be different. It means we have to respond to people differently. We have to treat people differently. It means that when we look at other people, instead of just seeing them as other people, that we're challenged to see them as brothers and sisters in the faith. We're challenged to look at them as you look at friends and family members, no matter if they are or not. Where we're challenged to treat everyone the same, and the way that we're challenged to treat people is with the love and the love of Christ. Where we're encouraged to treat everyone the same, no matter who they are, no matter what day it is, no matter what the social norm is, no matter what the expectation is. Treat everyone as though they are your brother or sister. Treat them as what they are, a child of God, where if we would find ourselves like the Pharisees on a Sabbath day, where if our son was in the well, we would do whatever it takes to get them out, to bring them back into safety, where we treat everyone with the love that God has for them. And that would dramatically change our world.